So hello everybody, we're here again, Higher Labs Coding Boot Camp. Welcome back. We're in week 3. We're at the end of week 3 on our Web Development Foundations week. We're doing backend frameworks. We're on day 6. We're going to do some connection between the backend framework that we set up and our sort of front end before we start doing real front end and back end development for the next 2 weeks after that. So we're still in the framework, the setup phase, connecting up the last pieces that we need to do and routing the last things that we need to do to before we get into the righteous development of our back end and front end pieces. Before we dive into today's content, let's do a quick review. So I know we covered a lot and really fast. So the big things that I want to hammer are everything that we've done up to now and everything we will do and everything we interact with is files in directories. I'm going to keep hammering that point. Most important thing up to now is remember that if you can track down the file and read what's in it, read the directions, that's what the computer is doing. And that's what all software is. So what we're doing here is setting up files in directories. That's our application. That's what our web application is. So I guess as more specific review, one of the things that we talked about last time was a concept from one of the reading materials that I recommend everyone digs into, the timeless way of building. But the concept of dividing a finite space where the whole thing precedes the parts and you differentiate the space inside of it, not adding things outside of it modularly. In that book, he's talking about an office building. So there's like the plot of land. You have things inside of it, like a parking lot, main building, inside of the building, further delineations. And we gave the analogy to our web app with, we might have storage inside of our dotted line. There might be the environment itself or something like that. This is the plot of land or space on the internet where everything outside of it is the internet. Then inside we have our main application, which might have a homepage, some backend functions, those sorts of things. Also, for just review in that analogy as well, taking into specifics and real world where we ended up last time was over on our Python Anywhere. We separated some space on the internet for our plot of land that we're going to start building our application in. So that dotted line sort of thing, we went to our web tab and we started an app here. We gave ourselves this domain name, which you recall is your username, pythonanywhere.com. And that's telling the internet that we have a space. It's our address. It's our plot of land, right? And what we did after we set aside that plot of land here on this page is we started pointing all of our directories and everything into where we set up Django, our framework. Framework, again, if you recall, this particular one is written in Python, but it'll be written in a language. And once we delineated our space on the internet with our app, we put a framework inside of it that we're going to start building. And we initialized that and got it set up to a very basic level. And that's where we were here. If you recall, this mentions we have our debug set to true inside of our settings file. And we're seeing this because we haven't configured any URLs. Right. So any questions about the things that we've covered up to now? Any questions about these things or where we're supposed to be? Anybody stuck or had a question while you were doing this or following the documentation from last time?
Nothing for me.
Nothing? Yeah, I can't see anybody, man. Everybody's got their cameras off. So I'm over looking at like a big bunch of blank screens, like someone's gonna start shaking their head. But all right, cool. So no clients, no questions. But again, take yourself off mute, raise a hand, throw them out there if you got them along the way. And what we're going to do today, I have one more quick slide that I wanted to show just to kind of get this visually in here. We talked about the dividing of space. And again, our analogy of the web app, this outer line being our domain, our basic place that we're starting. This is a diagram that I got from Mozilla, which there's a reference in the references in the free coding resources. It's a great place to look for general web development stuff. And also Mozilla, Firefox and whatnot that's built in Django. So I kind of forgot to mention out of like the things that are built in Django, like Facebook and YouTube and stuff like that. Mozilla is one of them. But this diagram here is showing quite well what we are doing all the way along when we're doing web development. So over here on the left-hand side, on the top where it says server side, above this little circle, it's got files written on it. That's where we've been so far. That's where we've created our Django files and we've done all those sorts of things. And whenever we hit that green button and we reload to our server, this little arrow right here, pushing from the files to the web server, that's what we're doing is we're pushing that stuff into Python Anywhere. That's where this web server is. And that's just another computer some other place. Python Anywhere's web servers are somewhere on the East Coast. So we're pushing these into a server, which means we're just copying those files into a space on the web server at that URL, that uniform resource locator that tells this browser, the client side on this diagram, where to find those files. So I'm bringing up this picture because this whole interaction between a browser that sends a request, see this dashed line at the top, has the HTTP request added. And who remembers what HTTP stands for?
Hypertext something?
Yep, hypertext. That's HT. So that's halfway there. What's the last one? The TP stand for?
Protocol.
Protocol's a P. Excellent. So hypertext. And then what are we doing with the hypertext?
Transit.
Close. Transfer. Almost. Transit. I'll take it. Man,
Transit.
that's a synonym. Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we are transferring text, and the protocol is the rules by which we transfer, right? So this HTTP request is going to be a structured set of information. There's also something for people that were asking about or are interested in cybersecurity. This is one of the things that's very important to understand this interaction broadly is what's going on when the internet is operating. The internet is this, and the HTTP request will have all kinds of useful stuff in it. It might have user information. It might have, this is basically the browser. So let's take a step back and say when we go to a web page, we go to a URL, the browser is saying to the web server, find me the files at this URL in the request. And in that request, it's also saying, hello, I'm a Chrome browser. It's 2:00 in the afternoon. I'm located where I'm located. And this is the user who is asking. There's all kinds of information in the request. And the web server is going to take this request and it's going to process it. It's going to take it, it's going to read it, it's going to do something with it, and it's going to send back a response. This right here, this interaction, this request response interaction is what we are going to be doing and coding. It's what our application is going to be. It's what web apps are. So this basic function of files being pushed to a web server and being able to be sent between a browser and the web server according to requests from clients or users, and then request and response. These are standard terms. We're going to use them a bunch of times. We'll revisit this a lot, but we're going to start doing a little bit today. Any general questions about this? Okay. All right. So a lot of this, again, hopefully is not totally new because I know the internet is not a new thing, but I want to make sure that this is really clear what it is we're working on and where we're going to be involved in the situation and what we are doing specifically. So right now, the files, think about when we're in the console, we're making our files and directories. That's over here on this left-hand side on the server side. And we hit the green button, we're pushing it to our web server. It's Python Anywhere. And we're going to be dealing today with a lot more of the request response stuff. Cool. All right. So with that, then let's get into our hands-on stuff, unless there are any questions. And again, if there are, shout them out along the way. But we're going to go back over to Python Anywhere, and I'm going to leave this web tab open, but I'm going to go to my console. So we're going to start off doing some work in the bash console. I'm just going to slide this over because I prefer having it here. Up to you. But I'm going to open my bash console. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier for folks to see on the video. Hopefully it's not way too gigantic. But as you can see, I'm at my home directory. Or not my, my basic directory where I start, where the tilde is breaking down into what we are, or where we are right now. And if you remember, we have here a couple example files we used, our top level My Site project directory. So that's the site we're building now, and our virtual environment. So the first thing we're going to do, first thing I want to get used to everyone getting the habit of starting, when you start your day, you start working on a project, is we're going to activate that virtual environment. So you may not have called yours VM like I did. I called it that again to remind us what the package name is to create this. So we're going to invoke it or call it several times using the command source, SOURCE, all lowercase, space, and then we give the name of our virtual environment. So in my case is that VM, and then bin, and I'm using tab complete. Again, I start typing with one letter, and then there's no spell check in the console, but tab complete's the closest thing that we have. So I hit A, and then I hit tab, and then it'll slide all the way over and fill it in for me. So the name of our environment, bin activate, is how we turn on or activate our virtual environment. And as you can see, left-hand side of my console line is the name of my virtual environment in parentheses. That's how I know I've activated it. I'll clear this up so we have some more clear space a little bit, but we're still in our sort of home directory. We need to move into our working directory before we get started. So the next thing we want to do is change directories into the top level of our My Site directory. Now we are here. All right, so before we jump into getting going and running the commands that we need to run and doing the things that we need to do, I want to talk a little bit very briefly about something that's in the documentation, but it's a command called tree. So far we've been doing ls, which is short for list. There's another command that is very common to use called tree. It's going to give us a cool little picture of our file structure right here. So first, I'm going to run tree just by itself. And as you can see, it gave us this dot, which is reference to where we are now, like the home working directory. So we gave tree with no arguments. And then these little lines that show what's in that directory. So we have our manage.py file here. We have our my site directory. So that's the inner my site directory. We have the init.py file. Again, we're not going to worry about, but that's the modular thing that we need in Python. There's this PyCache stuff, which we're not going to worry about that. I'm going to skip this entirely. And in fact, I'm going to show a way to pull that out. It's in the documentation how to ignore this kind of stuff because we don't need it. But then here are the rest of our files that we've already looked at, the ASGI, the settings, URLs. So this is just going to give us a cool little graphical depiction right here, like of where we are, our file structure. So we don't have to go back to our GUI and look at it. And it's a little bit more depth than ls, a little bit cleaner, and it's very common to use. So we're going to use that as well. But again, we don't like this PyCache stuff being in here. So let's do it with some filters. So I'm going to show you to do that. First of all, actually, one of the flags that I like to use as well is the A flag. Alex, what's your question, man?
I'm sorry. What was the command to navigate to my site?
CD, change
Oh,
directory.
CD.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And just again, for everybody's reference, CD, if you recall, if you like CD to the wrong place and you're lost and you forget where you are, if you do CD with nothing, that takes you right back to the tilde and takes you home so you can start over again and CD into my site. But cool. All right. So once we're here and we're running the tree command, remember we also have our .env file that was in there. So if we do the the A flag, that'll show hidden files as well. So I'm gonna put the A flag on there. Then I'm also use this other ignore flag. I don't think I put the A flag in the documentation. That's again an optional thing that if you want to put it on now, you can. We'll see our env file in there. But this ignore thing is going to be helpful to get rid of the PyCache stuff. So I'm going to ignore, and then I'm going to give it a string. So this dash capital I is the ignore flag, and then we give it any pattern that we want it to ignore. So any files, folders, names, anything we don't want to look at. So for now, we don't want to look at PyCache, double underscore. And we know that later, I'm just going to do this now because, again, this is not a Linux class. This is for other things. There are other things I know I'm going to want to skip. So I know I'm going to want to skip what image, and I'm going to want to skip CSS for now later today. So this is the full filter that we got in, and most of this is in the documentation, except I think for the A flag. When we do this, it'll give us a much more compact look at our file tree, as we call it, with the .env file in it, in our inner my site, manage.py. So this tree command is just a cool little thing to use, and we're going to use a couple of times today to look at where we are as we make more directories here in the command line. And it'll be a lot faster than switching over into our GUI, even though we'll be working in that as well. All right, so everybody with it on this, any questions about how tree works, what we're doing with it, why I even showed it to you? All right. Cool.
I think I broke something on my end.
Okay. How's
It,
that?
it took me all the way out the space now, and I'm not sure how to get back to normal.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's not showing me the virtual environment, the time, the tilde, and a dollar sign anymore. It just
Interesting. So if you're stuck like that, a couple of ways to get out. The first way is to hit Control C. And that's what's called a keyboard interrupt. And that usually just interrupts whatever's happening in your terminal. And it should give you back control. Did that work?
that did it. Yeah.
Nice. So that's for anybody if you're ever kind of stuck in like you're just a blank screen, or it looks like you're hitting enter and there's a bunch of arrows or something like that. Control C will usually stop whatever's happening in your terminal and get you back to kind of square one, hopefully. And then again, if you're really, really stuck, don't worry about going back to your list of terminals and hit that little blue X and just throw it out entirely and start a new terminal. That's another, no shame in that either. All right, cool. So what we're going to do today is we're going to continue setting up some of the parts and pieces that come with the Django framework. Again, these are things that we're going to use to build on top of our application. So we're going to set up a space inside of our project folder, which again is our top level folder here, the My Site folder that we're in, the directory that we're in. We're going to set aside a space for our to-do application. We have a space here for our top level things where our settings are. We're going to do a couple more adjustments in settings. We're going to make some more directories. One of the things that I mentioned that a framework like Django will have is things like user logins and administrative tools that are built in. So this, again, if we go back to what's already there on our domain, our home, like our root, since we haven't given any URLs yet, we haven't told it to go to any other files yet, this is what it gives us by default. There's also some stuff built in by default at this admin URL. So if we just add to the end of our default root domain /admin and go there, it'll give us this nasty looking page that has a pretty familiar looking down here, like username and password. I don't know if you can see any of this because it's terrible looking. I'll zoom in a little bit if I can. But there's some buttons and some links. So there's a place where you can put in a username. There's a place you can log in. But this is just, I'm telling you now, and we're going to set up the back end pieces of this. This is just sort of the front end page of it. There are no users yet. We haven't made a user yet. So I'm going to show you how to make a user. But this is, again, stuff that just comes packaged in. We don't have to go in and describe how to make this page yet. These are the things that come with Django. So we're going to finish setting this up. We'll make this look better, and we're going to be able to log into it. So to do those things, we need a place to store things like usernames. So think back to when we talked in the beginning about the components of a computer and things like that. Where do you think we might want to store these things, like a username and a password? What kind of place would we store this? Memory or storage?
Storage?
Okay, Alex, say storage. Why storage?
Because you need this information later on.
You need it later on, right? And storage is something that maintains from one time to the next, right? So we need some sort of database. And we're not going to get deep into setting up our databases. That's for week after next. And we do back-end development and we design our databases and we make our own databases using Python classes. But to even have a username and a password, we need some sort of database. So this is going to come with some built-in databases in the applications. We need to just run a command to set them up. And so the commands we're going to run today are commands we're going to run again later, but they're going to come to reference some things that already exist. So for this to work, for us to be able to have a username and a password and all those things to log into, we need to run a couple commands. The first command back in our bash console, I'm going to clear this up so we got some space. Actually make it just a touch smaller. All right, so the first thing we need to do is a command called migrate. We're going to get to it by going through our manage.py. Remember the concept of entry points, right? So we use our main.py file. We're using manage.py for the entry point for Django. So a lot of the Django commands we call are going to be through manage.py. So we do Python 3 to let the system know what language we're generally using. And then we hit the manage.py using tab complete to make sure we're there. And we're going to write this command migrate. Now, what this is going to do is there are a bunch of things built in, again, that are called migrations. And they're basically just definitions of databases, things like usernames, super users, things like that. When you hit migrate on this, it should, hopefully, give us this long list of output that makes us feel good because there's a bunch of green OKs on it and no red warnings that said it broke. So that's off top's pretty good. But it also tells us exactly what it did. So it applied an admin, an auth, concept types. We don't need to worry about exactly what these are, but these are things that come built in. And these are the actual changes that were made. So these are the actual definitions of the database. We're not going to worry too much about this. Again, it's kind of for in a couple of weeks. We'll write our own. We'll do our own migrations. But this is giving us a few things. First, I'm going to clear that up, and I'm going to go up to our tree again. Let's see if it looks any different. Now, after I did that migrate command, we have this db.sqlite3 file. This is the development database that comes standard with Django, right? So we're going to get into SQL again week after next when we do backend development. But this is part of what comes with the framework. It gives us a very small, usable database that we could just start doing things with. So now that we have a database, here it is. It's just this file. So it's pretty much that simple. What we could do is we could start populating with things. We could start doing things with it. The first thing we need to do with it, again, when we have this login page, we need to create a user to log in so we can access the other things that are built into Django that let us do some backend stuff. To do that, here I'm going to clear this up. We're going to create what's called a super user. Now, this is similarly accessed to what we've done before using the entry point of Django through manage.py. So we do Python 3, manage.py. We're going to do create super user, all one word, all lowercase. When we hit enter on this, it's going to give me an opportunity to give a username. So if you want to use the one you already have, that's defaults here from your Python anywhere you can. I'm going to set this to admin on mine because I want to. I don't have to type in my whole username every time. So admin works for me. It'll demand an email address. This doesn't have to be a real email address, but it does have to follow the real email address conventions with an @ symbol and a dot something. So, again, use whatever you like, make up something. That's totally fine. You're not going to be emailing it. And then you just set a password. So whatever password you want, but whenever you start typing here, I haven't started typing yet, you're not going to see anything. If you haven't done this before, there's no feedback and it's a little weird. So when you start typing your password, you got to make sure you know what you're doing. I'm trying not to say my password out loud, but I just typed it. Yeah, really, got a question.
Does it need to be any kind of special characters or can it just be anything I want?
It should be good with anything. You should try it out and see if it runs into any restrictions, but I think I've done some really basic things like admin even as a password. So give it a shot. I don't think there are real tight restrictions on it. And there we go. So once you've done it and you validated and you put it in again, you'll say your super user has been created. It doesn't have to be a hyper secure password. It doesn't have anything like 20 special characters or anything like that. But if you forget this, there's no real way to get back to it. But you could just that simply create another super user and then go in and reset it again, like reset this for your other super user. Yes, Relius, what's the question?
So I tried a super basic password and I got 3 errors. Like this password is too short.
Okay.
Things at least 8. This password is too common. This password is entirely numeric.
Okay.
The bypass.
What do you do like 1, 2, 3, 4 or something like that?
Yeah, I got the same thing.
All right. Yeah. So give it somewhat, don't fake the funk too much and give it some kind of password. But it will accept somewhat silly things like, capital P assword or something like that, as long as it's got some numbers and exclamation point. But yeah, so then once you set your password, you will be able to log in to this place. Yes. Really? So what's the question?
Oh, sorry. I didn't lower my hand. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I thought it popped back up again. Okay, so you should be able to. What I'm going to do as a step here is I'm going to reload the source code on the server side. Remember that diagram? We're going to push. Now we've messed around in our files. We've done some stuff in here. I'm not always sure sometimes if this is a necessary step, but I always, every time I make a change on the file side, I reload the server side and then step over. Because again, if you get in the thick of solving a problem and you forget this step, it's infuriating to find out that you spent an extra hour beating your head against the wall thinking your fixes didn't work when all you forgot to do was reload the server side code. Okay, so when we reload that, it's not going to look any different because we didn't do anything to make it look different. But we should have now a functional login. Hopefully, if, first of all, I remember the password after talking all that noise about remembering your passwords. But if everything works, we should see it change into an equally ugly site administration site. So it says site administration. There's a bunch of stuff in here. I'm not going to try to step through what's here because this is nasty looking. And what the last piece that we want to set up is to make this look pretty, but it's also going to give us the ability to set up what are called static files. And static files are the things like CSS, which we're going to talk about next week, which is the cascading style sheets, what that stands for. And that's generally the colors and fonts and all the sorts of things on a web page that make it look nice. It could be scripts like any of your complex algorithms that you write that take time to process. Like we have some machine learning things, we have some AI things on our website. Those are separate in static files as like Google's, Python script or something like that. Those are the sorts of things that static files are. Our JavaScript, when we go to use JavaScript next week as a front end technology, we'll put that in our static files. So we need to do some more backend things in our settings to set up the routes and set up where our static files do. And once we do, we'll come back to this and it'll look a lot nicer. And then I'll show you what's in the back end of it a little bit more and what comes again built into this framework and pretty much all backend frameworks. But any questions up to now? Any questions up to here on how we set up our super user, gave it a password, email address, and then logged in? Go ahead and log out. So this gives us that functionality. It's all built in. Cool. All right. So we need to set up our static files directories. To get that done, we're going to need to get into our settings.py. So I'm going to go over here and open up files. I'm going to keep my web tab open in Python Anywhere and just open this in a new tab. Then we go down to my site project folder, and then the inner level my site, where remember we keep our project level settings and those sorts of things. So we're going to go to settings.py, open this up. All right, first thing we need to do is we're going to be operating with, well, I used operating, but we're going to use that again. We're going to be choosing a package that's going to let us interact with our operating system. So if you recall from the very beginning of class, we talked about operating systems are your things like Microsoft or Linux in our case, Mac OS, any of those sorts of things where your programs are running inside of, right? They're running inside of an operating system at all times. This program that we're writing, this is running inside of an operating system. Again, once again, Linux. That's the operating system we have here. Is what we're interacting with on the console. So this package, very, very common to use in Python, is a built-in Python package. So we just have to write import. And it's OS, stands for operating system. Tons of cool stuff that we've done with it. We're going to be mostly using it to route paths and directories, right? So right underneath this, I wrote it on line 16. Doesn't really matter. It's by convention that you put it at the top so that all of your packages and things like that are imported first before any of your code is run to make sure nothing breaks. But it doesn't really matter where you put it exactly. Actually, I should probably follow this style convention where things that are just import and then the name of it go on top of things that go from and then the name and then import. So it's more like a pyramid looking thing once you get a lot of these, but it doesn't really matter. So somewhere near the top of the page, we've imported OS as our package. And then before we move on and adjust any more settings, I wanted to talk about this really quickly. This all caps to denote a constant, even though, again, to refresh your memory, Python has no constants. It's actually a variable. This is just for human readability to remind us that we don't expect to change this value anywhere in our application. Base dir should be the same everywhere. And what it's doing is it's taking this path, which again was imported here from this package called pathlib, and it's doing some stuff with it, right? So this references of resolve.parent.parent. Basically what this is doing is it's looking in your project directory. That's what we set here, where our source code is in our working directory. It's looking at this directory and it's building an idea of what's there and saying, okay, this is our base directory. This is where everything that we do when we go to look for files, when a browser comes and asks us for a file, we're going to start here as our base, and then we're going to reference it in other ways. Like we'll get to it by referencing, mysite.env or whatnot, but base dir is going to be one of those things that we can use to build other references. Right, tracking that? Any questions on this in concept? Yes, really, so what you got?
So I get the concept of it's looking for the base directory and it is the path, and the path is called file, but then dot resolve with the close brackets. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that part, that level, I didn't want to get super in depth to. That's something I'm going to leave for you to look up because it doesn't make a difference for us right now. It's just a little bit outside of scope of the class. But basically it just means to line it up to understand where things are, right? But if you want to look at the functionality of these, again, it's all available and you should be able to get to it pretty much anywhere. Django itself if I remember correctly, is an open source project. So all of this stuff should be available somewhere, and you can actually contribute to it too. If you like look up Resolve and you think, I don't like the way this does it, you could suggest that Django changes it. So I will encourage you to look that up later. That's just outside of scope of what we're talking about today.
Okay.
Cool. All right, so we're going to use this base dir constant. Again, keeping in mind that it's actually a variable. We'll use it as a constant. So I'm just copying it here, so I don't have to write it again. But I hit copy. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Remember, this is where we adjusted our secret key. This is our debug setting. Set to true is where we set our allowed host. I'm going to skip through installed apps for now, but you'll notice as we scroll past these admin auth content types, that's exactly what was listed when we ran our migrations. So this idea of apps, we're going to get to that when we make our own app, and we're going to list our own app here. But this is how Django is structured. It has a project. This is the settings file for that project. And there are apps that this project uses. And so some of them come built in. These are the ones that come built in. Static files is what we're going to be using here. So we keep scrolling down. We're going to skip this middleware section. That's not for today. We're going to go down to this templates constant, which is a list. Let's open a square bracket. And this list contains what's this one with the curly brackets? And key
Dictionary?
Yep, dictionary. Good job. Key value pairs. We got the key. Here's our value. So we got something called backend. We're gonna look at the second key value pair. It's capital DIRS, short for directories. And its value is an empty string. So, or I'm sorry, an empty list. So as you can see, we talked about this before. This is called nesting. You can have a list containing a dictionary containing key value pairs where the value is a list. And then in that list, we can have further other things. So this is again, Python in action doing what it does, but we need to put a value into this value, this dir direct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that base dir constant that I copied from above. So it's just capital base underscore dir. And then I'm going to put a slash, and then I'm going to put the word templates. And what this is doing is this is telling the system, telling Django, that our templates, which we will start making and using, is one of the integral parts of how Django serves up a web page. It's the last step in it, is our templates will live in a folder called templates. That's all we're telling it here. And that folder can be found as an extension of our base directory. So nothing crazy there, just adding this base dir slash templates as a string, templates itself as a string, the base dir just as the reference to the constant into this list. All right, then I'm going to scroll down a little bit more, pretty much all the way to the bottom, and we're going to set up our static configurations or static files configuration. Now, static files, again, are the files that are going to be served up to a browser that are not our source code. They're things like CSS, JavaScript, those sorts of things that live in the front end. They're going to be loaded later as static files. It's an internet standard. The way Django does it as a backend framework is arguably not amazing, but every framework will do it in some way. So we're going to set this up. We'll show kind of the difference that it makes. To set this up, we need to add two more constant calls in here. This one is static URL. It comes built in. So URL, again, stands for, anybody remember what it stands for? I've said it a couple of times. I probably botched it a couple of times too. I always mix up the U and the L, but
Uniform resource list?
Uniform resource locator. Almost. Yeah, really good. Really good. Yep. So this static URL is just telling the system where the static files will be found when people want to go, when a system wants to go and look for them, what URL they will be at. So we're going to leave that alone as static. I'm just going to leave that set as is. That's fine. We're going to use that setting later, update our web tab on Python Anywhere, keep it that, but we keep it as default. That's totally fine. The first thing that we need to add is what's called a static root. It's all caps, static underscore root. And we're going to set this to a directory path using that OS that we imported above. And what this is, before I define it, is when you're developing, we're making our applications, which we're going to do soon, they will have their own sets of static files. Like let's say we do our to-do list. Let's say we want to make a calendar application. or a table reservation app or a ride sharing app or something like that. They can all live in our same project, in our MySite project. They can be distinct apps, and each of those apps can have their own static files with their own sets of, CSS, their own JavaScript, their own styles, their own everything. And this is just saying that when we go to load our site, the entire project is going to pull all those static files into one place so that our web server can serve it from one spot. And that's what the static root is. So the static root is one folder that's going to be at the very, very top level of our project. And we can give it any name we want to, but the way that we create it is we do os.path. If you recall, os is the package that we imported at the top when we first started. So os.path.join. And so it's going to take two things. It's going to take what path we want to start with, which once again is going to be our base dir constant, which is going to be, again, just our project directory. And then we're going to tell it that we want to have a static underscore main as a string directory. And this name static main, that's what I like to call it. You can call it literally anything you want to, except whatever this static URL is. You don't want to match these names. Well, that wouldn't be the end of the world. It probably would be good. You don't want to match those names, right? So you want this to be distinct from that. And you want this to be something that you know that you're going to be able to track later, right? We're going to enter this value again some other place. It's good to keep in mind that, again, I always put main on there because it is the main one. And each, again, application that you make is going to have its own static directory. So for that piece of it, the own static directory part, we get to define what those directories are called as well. So we do that with another constant called static files underscore dirs, DIRS. Now this is telling the system what the files, the directories inside of each application are going to be called, that are going to have static files in them. So you can, again, this is something we can call it whatever we like, but we don't want to call it the same as this. We don't want to call it the static main because that's where the main things are. That's where they're going to be collected to. We can call it the same as this, and that is actually the norm, is to keep calling it static so everyone knows what they're looking at as your project grows, and there's several applications out there. So calling this static is a good idea. It's actually what we're going to do. So this one is stored in tuple. Now, I mentioned that we don't use these a lot, and we're going to use one. But again, this is one of the few times we do. But if you recall, a tuple is stored in a set of parentheses, so open and close parentheses, and it can hold one or more things separated by commas. So the first thing that we're going to put into it in our static files directories tuple is another call to our OS package, so os.path, similarly .join. And we're once again going to include our base directory constant. And we're going to give it the name static. And this, once again, is telling our system that each application will have a static directory within it. So we're going to make our to-do list application. We can start picturing it now. We'll make it here in a second, but we'll make our to-do list application. It'll have its own set of files. And inside of that directory, the to-do list directory will have a static directory. So I finish up this call with the closing off the brackets for the join, and then a trailing comma. So this comma is just standard to put into things that can hold multiple comma separated values. Like if we scroll up here a little bit, this auth password validators, which we don't need to worry too much about. It's a list of things. So it's a list. You see the last item in the list has a trailing comma, as it's called. This is just common in Python. It's not going to break it. It's not required. You could leave that comma off. But it's a good habit to get into, to put it there so you don't forget. If you do want to come in here and add something else, it's a lot better to always add a trailing comma. Then you can add more things without having to remember to add a comma before you start writing. So that's what this is doing. It is just one thing, trailing comma. Any questions about what we just did here with the static root, static dirs, why these two can't be named the same thing, and what we're even setting here? So I want to make sure we're clear on this, because it's one of the things that's important to get right, but it's a little tricky to understand at first. And we are going to make it a little more concrete by running it and seeing these files in action. But any questions before we do? Okay. All right, so as a refresher, this is what our admin site looks like now. We go to log in again. It still looks all nasty and jacked up looking. We made some changes to our settings. I'm going to save this before we do anything else. And then we're going to go over to our bash console and clear this up. And let's have a look real fast at our current structure. So now after we ran our manage.py and then we ran migrate, the command gave us our database. And now we're going to run another command called collect static. And it's going to do what I mentioned. It's going to look for static files in our project, and it's going to make this static main directory. If it doesn't exist, it's going to put all the static files into it. And that's going to include all the static files we need for the admin section that we don't have in our own project. They come built in. So let's clear this up and let's do our Python 3 manage.py. And then we do collect. Oh, let me just zoom stuff out of the way so I see what I'm writing. Collect static, all one word, all lowercase. Then we hit enter. It's going to give me this warning. It says, okay, no, there's no static directory, but that's okay because we didn't make one, so we don't expect there to be one, and this didn't break anything. It's just giving us that warning. And then it's telling us 127 static files copied to this directory, the my site static or static main directory. So it tells you exactly what it copied. It didn't tell you where it copied it from, but that came with the admin stuff that was built in. So let's go ahead and just do the tree command. I cleared it up again. Let's do a tree command, just have a quick look. And now you can see down here at the bottom, we have our static main and we have an admin directory inside of it. And that is what comes in standard. And inside of it is going to be all these JS and image and CSS. That's why I put these filters here so it didn't just completely take up our whole screen here. Alex, you got a question? What is it?
Yeah, so I did Python 3 manage.py collect statics, and it gave me error. It says the static files dir setting should not contain the static root setting.
So that means you have these static root and static dirs set the same thing. So these got to be different things. So this top one's got to be static main or something else than what this one is.
So remember how I downloaded the Django instead of like manual setup when I first started?
Yeah.
So I realized in my setting file, there's already static root and static URL set up for me.
Oh, okay, cool.
Bottom.
Okay.
So maybe that's the issue.
Yeah, I mean, it might be, but if it looks, that's the thing is you can set it to whatever you want to. It just comes it comes default when you press that button to something, but you could change it to look like this right now and it should be totally fine.
So you erase the bottom, the default static.
Yeah, whatever's there. I'd leave this static URL, however it is, and then if they have something for static root, if you make it look like this, it should work. If you have these two lines that look roughly like this, work.
Yeah,
then it should work. But the main thing is that these two names can't be the same. So whatever they named this one, you got to name this something else, or change this to static main because we're going to use this a couple other places. But that's what that means. So that error means that these two are named similarly, and that can't happen.
Yeah. So what I did right now is I delete the bottom static root static URL that came with the Django file that I first downloaded.
Sure.
I just erased those two, and then I did run the bash console. I did type it, and then now it's working.
Without these two?
No, so I already had static URL and static root inside my setting before I set it up.
You just deleted these and then ran collect static again?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
And then it's working now.
I'd be curious where that put these things. But okay, cool. If it's not stuck, I would advise having these things set because you may run into problems later. But if you got it working up to that point, then we can let it ride. That may be something you need to revisit because if this is really kind of the target, but again, the goal is always to get things working. So if it works the way you got it, you can leave it.
Yeah.
We can move on. All right, cool. So then once that has been done, the other thing we need to do, so we've done a couple of changes. Back on our web tab, we need to, similarly like we did with our source code overall and the other things, we need to update these paths to the different directories. So our URL here is going to be the same one that we've got here, the static URL. So it's just going to be static. I'm just going to copy this because we're going to put it in the same spot. I think it suggests that as an example, when you click on this red entered URL, it says example/static. So I'm going to do that, put /static/ we'll check mark to save. And then I enter path. We got this home / your username, thing, which is generally where we are. I'm going to copy our working directory because that's pretty much where we're going to be, except this is where we're going to put our static main directory, right? And if you recall, that is at our top level. So here's our top level. The dot right up here is the top level, and our static main is where we want to be. And that's what we want to tell Python anywhere in this directory in static files. So we're enter path. We have our home /username /my site. And then we do static. And I did underscore main. Save. So that's the directory that we want to have when this runs. This is our server. Again, think of this as our web server. When this runs, it's going to go to this directory and look for all of our static files instead of going into each individual application and finding static files that way. Yes, Aurelius, question.
Did you copy the directory for somewhere, or you just typed that in?
Yeah, I copied it from right up here because it's the same beginning point as the working directory. And then I just wrote static main in there. So I copied it up to the my site point. All right, so now that we've done that, we're going to, as always, reload the server-side code to actually push these changes that we've made up to our server side. So when a browser accesses our server, it should give it the latest code that we've written with our latest settings, adjustments, and all the things that we've done, hopefully. So when we go back to this login screen and refresh our browser, the refresh sends another request back to our server. That request comes back with a response, and the response has our static files now. So now we have what this is supposed to be. Now I can log in like I did before with my same username and ultra high security password. And now you should have an admin panel, as this is called, that looks like this. This is the default Django admin panel. I have it on dark settings, so yours may not be dark like this. I don't remember if it's sensitive to that in your browsers, but it might be. Point being, this is what it comes with. It comes with something called Django administration. We have something called groups, and this right here called users. These are our database tables. We're going to make our own tables later, but these are the ones that come standard with it. And we can open this up by just clicking on it. We go in there. Here's the admin user that we made. Here's the email address that I made up. It says it's staff. So this is kind of some stuff that comes built into it. I can click on this. There's a way to reset the password here. I can fill in more details, first name, last name, adjust the statuses, make them not a super user, make groups. So do all the basic sort of application administration stuff. And we don't even really have an application yet. So this is the beauty of frameworks. This is what frameworks do for you, is that we've done just a very small handful of commands at the very beginning points of a project, and we already have this fully functioning back-end administrative tool set that we can use to start doing things and manipulating the basic parts and pieces of our site as we build it. So this isn't usually something we want to give people access to. This is usually something reserved for, again, site administrators and very low-level developer kind of things. But as we build our own application on top of this next week, we start building this sort of thing, we're going to be doing very similar operations as what can be done here. So this gives us the ability to do what are called CRUD operations, or create, read, update, and delete operations. So those are the things you could do with database objects, these tables, right? So we could create a user, we can update users, like this add button, we can create users. We can read them by looking at them. This is reading right here. We're looking at it right here. We can update them when we click this, make changes to it. There's a little delete button where you can delete them down here at the bottom. That's what we're going to do with our to-do list app as well. We're going to build these similar functions. When we do, we're going to define these sorts of objects. Like this user thing here is an object in a database that has these parameters, it's got this username, it's got a password, it's got first name, last name. We're going to go through building these things ourselves, right? But there's going to be a place that we can interact with those things as we build them. Yes, Riley's question. I was just going to ask if somebody had questions. So well-timed hand.
Yeah, I just got stuck at adding the directory, and once I added and went back to my site, I'm not seeing this guy here. It's still showing me the site administration with the white screen and 3 black dots.
Site administration with a white screen. So it doesn't look all these different colors like this. Did you run Django or did you run the collect static and get the static files in there?
Yeah.
And you've got your static main, like your file directory structure kind of looks like this.
Yeah.
Do you remember reload on the
Yeah,
browser?
I reloaded the browser.
And you've got these things set up with your static and your static main.
No, it's my site small static name. Okay.
All right. Anyone else stuck?
Got an error with that.
Uh-oh. What error did you get? What's it saying?
It went away.
All right.
Let's move the word.
Well, you got it?
Second. No,
No,
still see that white screen.
still stuck?
Yeah.
All right, man. Double check both of these, both your static root and your static files, DIRs settings. Whoop, that's a lot bigger than I want to make it. But there we go. So zoomed in a little bit so you can see them. And one thing that I often do is I'll forget, well, that shouldn't be a problem. No, that shouldn't be a problem. But I forget to make this a tuple. That might be an issue. But you didn't get any errors when you ran collect static? That ran just fine?
I think it's just me and my bad spelling. I got it now.
You got it? All right, cool. Cool. Yeah, there's a lot of names to make sure they line up in a lot of different places in here. So that's real easy to do. All right, excellent. So if there are no other questions or anything, we can move on to, now we've got our admin panel. We can start setting aside that space in our area here. So again, if we think of our website, our home domain, that our username .pythonanywhere.com as a plot of land, and we're building inside with our framework, we need to set aside some space, differentiate now from where our settings and things are in our top level project folder. Alongside this inner level folder, we're going to make our application. So Django is made of multiple apps. Our app is going to be the to-do app. It's going to hold our create, read, update, delete functions for the to-do thing and our to-do URLs and all the specifics to that. So let's get going. All right, in our My Site directory, the top level directory, we're going to run Python 3, and we'll go through the Django app entry point, manage.py. I'm going to do start app, all one word. And then we're going to give it a name. All right, so you can give it pretty much whatever name you want to. We're going to call it to-do, T-O-D-O, which may not be the most amazing name. I suggest calling it the same thing to make it easier as we move forward. If you call it something else, and then you end up having a problem referencing a name or referencing something earlier when you're trying to follow along, it'll just take longer to debug. It might be a pain. So I suggest calling it this, but when you start an app, you can call it anything you like. But keep in mind, when you do, first of all, it probably won't give me any feedback that it did anything. So we're going to look at our tree structure once again and see that it made a directory for us, a to-do directory. Right? So here we're in our root directory. See, I can make this a little smaller so it all fits on one screen. So we're in our root project directory here where the dot is. And we have our development database. We've got our manage.py file, our my site directory with all the things that we've talked about are inside of that. Here's our static main with our admin things. That's all we have in there for now. And then our to-do directory. So this was just made with all of these files in it. So this is what comes in a Django application. And we're going to go through several of these files a number of times. Some of them we're going to kind of skip, but I'm going to go through a real quick orientation to show you what's even in here. So there's another $init_.py. It's a real standard modularity thing in Python. This is what makes to do a module that can be called, that can be used and referenced outside of it. Admin.py, we're not going to do a lot with that, but that is one of the places where we register our models once we start doing our definitions of database tables. That's where we'll do that in here in models. Apps, again, not much we're going to do with that. This is if we need to access other applications. We'll look at that real quick today when we start mapping some of the URLs if we get to that piece. The main things that we spend a lot of time in is views. And then we're going to map our views through URLs of some sort. So there's no URLs file in this to do application yet. We're going to make a URLs file in here as a sort of a design choice. We'll talk about why we do that. But I want to get us into the habit of starting with a view. We define a view, which is going to be a function in Python. So we're going to write a function in Python that's going to handle the response and request aspects of that HTTP thing that we talked about. So the request that comes in, it's going to get a response back to it. That's where we're going to handle that interaction explicitly by writing what we call views in Django, which is going to be Python functions for us. They can be classes. We might get to refactoring that towards the end. But so we'll start by writing views, and then we're going to map those views through a URL. And then we are going to tie that, we're going to point that URL to a template, which again, there's no templates directory in here. We'll make those when we get to that piece of it today. All right, so we got our app. Let's get started with some stuff. First, before we go any further, we need to do one more thing in our settings and add this newly made app to our installed apps. So I'm going to go real quick into our settings.py file. Actually, before we get into this, I'm going to open this up and show you something else. So in the top level, my site directory is where I am now. I'm going to go into our to-do directory. This is one we just made. So I'm going to look at the apps.py file in our to-do. So it's to-do apps.py. No changes to make here, not anything to do. I just want to show you what's in here. So this is a class, and it's called to-do config. So it's the name of our app as a class. So to-do and then config. So we're going to need this name. We're going to use it. And we're going to need to tell in our settings to look for this configuration class and run it. So in our settings.py, we have to add this to installed apps, this name, this to-do config. We need to tell it where to find it, right? So it's in to-do apps. So back in our settings.py, if we scroll, we're looking at our static root down at the bottom of the file. If we scroll up to installed apps, which is just underneath allowed hosts and debug and all that sort of stuff, it's a list of strings. And underneath the very last item, as you see, it has the trailing comma. So after that comma on a new line, we're going to add another item. So it's the name of our app, to do. So that's the top level directory, to do, and then dot apps, which again, remember that's the name of this file, the apps.py file that has our to do config class. And we reference that class and put a trailing comma. Now we do this, we save it, it will know that that app, now that directory belongs in our project, and it'll access the files inside of it the way it's supposed to. All right, so let's go write our first view. So now that we have all these things hooked up and we've made our directory, we have our views.py, let's go open that up and write a view. So we're in our apps.py, I'm going to back up to the to-do directory. I'm going to open up a views.py. Now it starts out with something built in that says from Django.shortcuts import render. Now render is something we're going to be using, and it basically just prints something out on the screen, right? So what we're going to do is write our first view down here. Now we're going to write a place for a home page where we're going to update. If you recall, right now, I'll go back to our site, click on the view site page. This is our home page right now because we haven't routed any URLs. So we're going to do that. We're going to configure our own, starting with the view. So the view, as I mentioned, is going to be a function. So it's a Python function. So we're just going to start by writing that. Here, I can zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier to read, hopefully. And we're going to define this function as a descriptive title of the page that we want to serve. And it is very common in internet parlance to call your homepage index. Now, this can be index in several ways. It could be index for just a specific application. Each application can have its own index and landing page and all those sorts of things. But index is really, really common. You'll see it in projects. You'll see it used all the time. Now, every time you're writing a view in Django, it's going to be handling, if you recall, a request from a browser. So let's picture what's happening here. This is the input. It's coming from a browser. It has a request. If you recall, a request, it's got all kinds of information in it that we could do a ton of stuff with. All we're going to do with this one, a very, very simple one, is we're going to go straight to the return statement. We're going to use that render package that we came up here, and we're going to render the request is the first thing that it takes. So some information from the request is going to go into our response. So we're now creating that response that goes back to the browser. The second element that we want to give render is the name of the template, the page, the actual layout page file in our system that we want it to render. So right now we're going to give it a string of index.html, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's an internet standard. We're going to mess with it more next week. We'll do a little bit today if we get time. But that's it. This is a view. So this is a fully formed view. When I saved it, that little warning error went away. It was just telling us that we weren't using this package, but now we are. So now we should be good. So what this is doing is a request comes in. It's going to render that request into this template that we designated. We have to make this template, but now it exists. All right. Next thing we do, now we've written a view. Next step, and we're going to go over and over and over these steps. But the next step is to configure a URL. We're going to configure URLs. So in our to-do app directory, go step up. We don't have a urls.py in here. We only had one up in the project level. So I'm going to add one here for the lower level thing. And this is one approach. This is sort of a design decision. You don't have to do it this way. We could add them to the top level, but we're going to use the ones that are in here for our own application and keep them separate. We'll go look at the top level apps URLs here in just a second, but we're going to write our own application level URLs directly here. So in our urls.py, we've got a totally blank page. And we're going to start by importing from Django.urls this cool thing called path. So import path, all lowercase. And then we're also going to import from where we are, right? The directory that we're in, our to-do directory, we're going to import our views. So that's going to give us the ability to use all the views that we write in the place that we write them. Now we're going to define a list of URLs. And that list we're going to store in a standardly named URL patterns. That's what is expected. So don't call this something else. We're going to call it URL patterns. The other option to putting this in its own distinct URL file is to use, I'll show you, URL patterns exists in the top level one. We could have just appended things to it, but that gets messy as your project gets larger. So we're going to do it here separately. But call this URL patterns, all one word, no dashes, no spaces, all lowercase. And it's going to be a list. And inside that list, we're going to define our path. And this path is going to point to the view. It's going to take the view that we wrote, that if you remember, it handles the request and the response, and it's going to give us an actual URL and assign a URL for that view and link it to the template name. And so it's all tying this all together is what this thing is doing. So for this first one, since it's our index, if you recall, is the one that we want to use, we're just going to give it an empty string. So just open quotation marks, closed quotation marks, nothing between it, and then a comma. And we're going to put in our next value. And that means it's going to be the root. It's going to be the end. It's going to be just our domain name. So this is going to be our index, our home page, right? So views.index is how we reference the view that we want, right? So dot notation we've seen before. We imported our views. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot the word import. Whoa, that would have been dumb. So from dot import views, we're going to make sure we have our views imported. So we have to give that a command import up here on line 2. Now that we do, we can reference it with dot notation. So views.index. And then we're going to pass it a keyword argument of name and tell it that name is also index. Because we're going to reference this in some other places when we start writing links and doing all sorts of things on the front end of our page. But now we're going to save this. I put the trailing comma in here. When I save this, we should be good on this page, routing our URL. So we imported path, we set our path. And now what we need to do is we need to go to our top level URLs and what's called include this URLs in the overall project. So these are going to be our app specific URLs, but we're going to include it in the top level URLs file. And let's go open that by going to my site. We go to my site. So it's the inner level my site directory. We go to the URLs that came built in. So this is the urls.py that came built in with Django. It's at my site, URLs. This top level. And it comes with this string. The first thing you see is this URL configuration for my site project, then a whole bunch of stuff. There's a link to some more info. And then it gives you some really cool examples. This is really helpful stuff. So function views, it tells you how to do it. Here's that path statement that we just wrote. So if you forget the syntax of it, it's already written in and it tells you how to do it to add that. Class-based views, if we get to that in class, hopefully we do by the end of class, this is how you do them. And then we're going to go down here where it says include another URL conf. That's what we're doing here by adding our to-do URLs. If you look down below that, this is pretty similar. The only real difference here is we have this admin thing, but here's the path that we imported. Here's our URL patterns, and there's a path to that admin URL that we went to already, right? So we can name our URLs whatever we want. This is where we define the actual thing that's written up here. Remember, we wrote admin up here and went to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to follow this, including another URL conf pattern to include our to-do list things. So this right here where it says path, and this is how you build it. I'm just going to copy this example and update the things where it says blog and just change it to the name of my stuff, right? So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to put it on top of the admin one. It doesn't really matter. You can put it underneath, but I'm just going to put it on top just because that's what I like to do. I'm going to take this out entirely. I'm going to put an empty string because, again, this is going to be our homepage for now. This is going to be the route that it goes to for right now. And we're going to change this blog.urls to the name of our app, which is to-do.urls. And that should be it. We should now be able to include, when I save this, what's this telling me? Undefined name include. Of course, I can't actually include things unless I import include. It also comes from Django.url, so I forgot to add that path up here. So up on line 18, right in front of path, or after it, doesn't matter. I'm going to put include and separate include and path by a comma. So that'll import both of those packages from URLs. And that got rid of my little error warning. And now it should be good. All right, so what we've done here is we have routed our to-do URLs. All of them are going to be included in our project level. So now we can reliably go and see them. But if you recall, I'll go back to our to-do URLs. We have to get used to bouncing around through these directories. That's a lot of what this development is going to be, is going through one URLs file to another, one file to another, all throughout. So if you recall in here, we reference something called index as the name in our views. And then if we go into our views.py in our index function, where we're handling our request and rendering a response, we reference an index.html file. We don't have that file, so we have to go make that file. That's the next step that we've got to do. And to do that, we're going to go out into our top level project directory, and we're going to make our templates file right here along next to our static main or to do. We could do this in the bash console, but I'm going to do it here so we don't lose anyone. We'll just put under the directories the name of the directory that we're going to do. We do templates, all lowercase. Recall that's what we set in our settings.py file. Do directory templates. All that makes it, refresh your memory. In our templates setting, templates was the name we used in our directories. So the system is expecting to look for it in a directory named templates. So that's why we called it that. And then inside of our directory is empty, so we have nothing really to look at here. We are going to put in our, what's the name of this template? Anybody?
Was that the index?
Index. Do you remember the
HTML?
Yep, HTML, right? HTML. Cool. Index.html. And let's go write some basic HTML. All right, here we are, starting a blank screen again. Now, we're going to do a lot of front-end development stuff next week, and we'll do more in HTML. But right now, let's get some real basic stuff up there so we got something to look at, and we see that our routing worked, and we see that it's all connected and hooked up, right? So the first thing before we go real deep into this, for anybody who hasn't seen HTML before, it revolves around what's called tags, and they're contained into these little bracket things with the less than and greater than symbol. And in between it, they're going to have some kind of word like H1 is a heading 1 or something like that. And that's called an opening tag. And when it has a slash in front of it with the same name as the opening tag, that's called a closing tag. And the information in between is the stuff that is printed out on the screen, right? So this is called an H1 tag. It surrounds the information that is projected out on the screen, and it tells it what to do with that information. So this will make it a heading. 1 is the biggest heading there is, so it'll make a large heading for it, right? So that's broad strokes what HTML is. Let's start using some. So the first thing in the recent version of HTML, HTML5, it likes being told what document type this is. So we put this tag as kind of a standard with no closing tag. After I just told you they're closing tags, this one doesn't have it. So sometimes closing tags are optional, but it's just this kind of opening bracket thing, exclamation point, doc type, all caps, and then HTML. And I don't think doc type being all caps really matters. This is kind of a standard you're going to see out there. I'm not convinced it's going to break anything if you don't do it, but do it. The next thing we need to do is define our space. Remember the concept of delineating space inside. So we got our whole page that we're looking at. We're going to define our HTML page. This HTML tag, when I started writing it, I wrote HTML. When I closed it off, Python Anywhere did this piece for me. Everything in here is going to be on our web page. That's the idea. So all the stuff that's in this entire browser that we want to change, including the little tags at the top that say like this install worked and settings.py and all that stuff up here at the top of my browser, all those settings can be handled in here. So this HTML page is delineating where our HTML is going to be. So all the things between these tags is going to be on our web page someplace. May not be visible. We have to decide if we want it visible or not, but it'll be there. So we're not going to go real deep into this, but we're going to just lay out a couple of big pieces that we could play around with and have something to look at. So the first one that's real common to have is called a head element. And our head element is going to contain inside of it something called a title element. And that title is going to be, again, these things that are up here where you got the little icon, says settings.py or whatever is written on the top tab of your browser. And I'm just going to put the name of the site. So that's just my site. You can put anything you want to in there. This text, though, is what's going to be visible. Somewhere under the head tag, we're going to put the appropriately titled body tag. Now, this is everything else that's on your page. So all the stuff that's like below this address bar that's inside of the body of your page, of your web page, is going to be on your body element for the most part. There's some other elements that might take up some space on there, but think of this for the beginning as this is really the page. This is the thing. So let's put something in there. I'm going to use that H1 tag that I mentioned before, and I'm just going to put a statement that we are, in fact, on the index and that we've made it. Okay, so if we've hooked everything up properly, what we should see now is I haven't refreshed my browser. I haven't done any of the reloading yet, and I left this how it was. And if you recall, this is where we ended last time. When it said you didn't configure any URLs, so you're looking at this page. We have now configured URLs. We went and configured our first view that will take a response, a request from this browser to go to this domain, and it will request the file that is at that domain. And we have told that file to be this HTML. So we should expect all this stuff to be visible once I reload server side and refresh the browser. So reload, we could do it from here. We don't have to go back to our web tab. This little kind of recycling button up in the top right in the code editor, text editor. You could use that to refresh or reload. Reload the server side. And when that's done, I'll go over here and try refreshing. And there we have the HTML that we wrote. The really not exciting to see, but exciting that it worked, telling us that we are on the index. Any questions? Anybody able to follow or stuck somewhere along the way on any of the steps? Alex, what do you got?
Yeah, I just run the homepage and it says something went wrong.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Maybe I missed something.
Okay. You have to dig into your logs and have a look at what went wrong. Remember, go to your error logs, and either in your log files or in that message itself. Should have a link to this error log, and that's where you want to go to see what went wrong and try with that error message to see if that might give you a hint.
So it's gonna be all the way at the bottom, right?
Yeah, the most recent one will be at the
log.
very bottom. Yeah, yeah. Should be.
All right.
All right.
So
Always looking for that. Realize, what's your question, man?
Got the same error. It's saying no module name Django URL.
No module named Django. Okay. So that mean what does that? What do you think that's telling you?
I missed a step.
Okay, but what step do you think is like what is being broken there? What is not working? When it says that it can't find the module or no module named, what's it trying to do that it can't do?
Just trying to call it, I guess.
Right. So where do we call modules typically in our Python code?
Not sure.
Okay. Okay. So it was read the thing again. What was it? It was what was not found?
Um,
Was it
no
Django URLs?
module name Django URL.
All right.
Yeah.
So was it I'm guessing that in your to-do URLs, that the file that we made, that you probably misspelled something here in our import statement.
I believe. Let me see.
So make sure that you have URLs, it's got an S at the end, and then it's separated by a dot. So it's Django.url, like plural URLs. Make sure it's spelled exactly like that, because it sounds like it just couldn't find this.
URLs.
And then while you're checking that, Alex, you figure out what your error code was saying?
yeah, it says my site urls.py line 22. So I'm navigating to urls.py line 22.
All right.
Oh, so and I'm looking at line 22 is the URL patterns that's a list, right? Line 23. Yeah, it's giving me error line 23.
What's the error in line 23? Did you forget to put this comma here to separate the two things?
To include to-do list. Oh, I forgot parentheses, closing parentheses.
Parentheses. That'll do you. Include is an internal thing to the path. So there's two sets of parentheses there. So there's double parentheses at the
I
end.
forgot that.
Cool. Yep. All right. Cool. Anybody else got questions or anything else? There's one other thing I was hoping to get to if we got time, but again, we can leave that as optional. If we have more questions, I can leave that as like homework over the next couple of things. But I would like to kind of implement the template language and then leave adding another page and doing the route practice as something that y'all can do over the weekend. So any other questions before we do the template real quick? The template language real fast. I know a lot of folks dropped off already. So for those of you that are still with us, Gloria, you got a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I know you gave us some resources and whatnot to check out, and I tried rewatching these classes, but at this point I'm totally lost.
Okay.
So what resource would you say for a true beginner who's never coded before to start to just have, because even the directions, these directions of how to set up things or whatnot, I still don't even follow this.
Okay. Well, so I mean, I would definitely just want to take your time. Don't feel that you need to keep up on pace with us, right? So keep trying these things. These are fairly basic level things. But in the resources, the free code camp is a wonderful, 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 wonderful place to start. It's the very top of the free resources. That's number one place to start. There's a recommended course in edX, the Harvard CS50 course that explains things at super beginner, low level. Excellent place to get conceptually what to do. The free code camps going to be more hands-on kind of stuff. But that's where I would start. I would start at those sort of top few things in the resources list. And then with this, I again stick to it. It doesn't have to be on pace with us and doing it at this speed. I know it's really fast. That's the idea, is that the bootcamp is supposed to be fast. So if you feel like you're totally lost and you're not keeping up with this how it is, it's okay. Drop back and do it a little bit slower, and you know, stick with it. Go back to the free code camp things and those things and practice a little of the basic stuff a little more. Reach out to me. I can sit down with you one-on-one and go over these things a little bit so we understand a little clearer. But that's what I would recommend, definitely, is just don't stop is really the idea.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. And don't get discouraged by it. Again, I don't want you to feel that, you know, I know there are times where it'll feel way too fast, but just don't stop on it, and it'll start clicking. It'll start clicking for you. All right. So one more thing I want to quickly kind of just step through as a piece of this back-end framework that we're going to be using as we get into the front-end stuff and the things we're doing. So I want to familiarize ourselves with it and kind of set ourselves up to use it. And it's called the template language. So it's another kind of set of characters we got to get used to using, but it shouldn't be too much in addition to what we've already done. And it's fairly simple to plug in. So the first thing we're going to do, basically, I guess conceptually, is what we're going to do is break out our templates. If you call from up here, my site, templates. We wrote this index.html. What we're going to do is we're going to break out a lot of the stuff that's in here into the things that are constant on all pages, and then the things that might change. So the stuff in the body that might change, we're going to set that aside into another file, and keep all these other things like the head element. That's probably going to stay the same all the time. This HTML element, that's probably not going to change. So we're going to separate this out so that we can basically inject dynamically the parts in the body that will be changing as we do things. Right? So that's the purpose of this template language. That's what Django's framework is really good for, is this sort of interaction. So to do that, the setup is fairly straightforward, fairly simple. We're going to the templates directory, and we're going to make a new file. We're going to call this file base.html. It doesn't have to be called that. That's a convention. And in this base.html file, basically what we're going to do is we're going to take pretty much what we have from our index that's now in our index, and we're going to put just about all in there, right? So I'm just going to copy everything. There's a piece of it we're going to take out, but it's easier to copy everything and delete the things that we don't need on the other side. So I'm copying everything from our index, put it in base. And then I'm going to remove just this section in the body, this H1 tag. I'm going to take that out. I'm going to leave everything else, the doc type, the HTML, the head element, the body tag itself. And I'm just going to leave it like this. I'm going to add the Django template tag that's going to tell it to put things in here. So that's all I'm going to put in the base. And these open with curly brackets and a % sign. So curly bracket, %sign, and then they close also with % sign and then curly bracket. So I put all these, the closing and putting tags, I'll put those together so I don't forget, because it's kind of annoying. But what we're going to put in here is what's called a block. It's the word block. And that's a reserved word, so we don't use that for anything else. But then what follows is a variable name, so we can call it anything. So we're going to use content as kind of standard to say that this is what is in here is content. So it's our content block. So these take a closing tag that's also a reserved word called end block. And what this is going to do is just tell our template that this space here is where we're going to put things. And we're going to put what we want to put in there in other files. So this will make it a lot easier for us as our application grows and becomes complex to have our stable things from our homepage here, and then the function that we build as we go out in other files will be a lot easier to maintain, a lot easier to run, and a lot easier to operate all the way around. So really all we do is just add this little piece right here. And then we got to do one other change. Save this. Back in our index.html. And then we got to take basically everything out of here. We don't need pretty much all of this, except for that H1 tag. Remember, this is the only thing that's unique to this page, is the H1 tag. So we got to tell this now, this file, that it's a part of this Django's template operation. And to do that, we need to reference that base.html file as the thing that we are what is called extending. So we're going to use the built-in word extends at the top. So we do our opening curly bracket, parentheses, and then extends. And then we're going to tell it as a string what we want to extend. So base.html, the name of that template. And what that's going to do is just reference all the things that are in that. So all the tags and everything that exists on that, or it's going to read that and say, okay, cool. This will be an extension of that. Now we further need to tell it where we want this to go. So we just need to reference that block tag that we wrote into our basic template, our base template, in the same way that we wrote it, except this time. So we do block content, parentheses, curly brackets, I'm sorry. And then we do the end block around it. Bang. Cool. So that's it. So what we've done here is we've extended our base.html template, and we've told it that in the content block, we want to put in this piece. That's an H1. Yes, Alex, you got a question?
Yeah, so we have to change the indentation, right, for H1?
So the indentation, good question, really good question. I was gonna say that does not matter on these markup languages. So that's more human readability. I just don't want to leave it way out over here. But yeah, good question, good call. That was something I wanted to mention. It's not gonna matter on this. What these are gonna do is just kind of compile it down to one line and read it really fast anyway. So unlike Python in HTML and these markdown or markup languages, as they call them, none of that matters.
Okay.
Yeah, really, it's a question.
Did you create the base directory in the templates or in its own directory?
In templates.
In
So in the templates, yeah, in the templates directory right next to index. So it's like it's in the same directory.
So you created a file, not a directory.
Yeah, file. So it's a base.html is that file. And it is the one that contains the base template information of our HTML page. And then the index itself, which is the one that we're going to actually go to, is extending that and has the content inside of it.
Okay, so
Makes sense?
I'm kind of far behind.
Oh, yeah, sure, no worries.
When setting up the base, you took what was in the original index and put that into the base?
Yeah, I took it all out of here basically from the index, copied it all over because it belongs in the base part, and the index is going to be the part that's, we'll change parts of this.
And now in the index, we put this extend to here.
Yep.
Okay.
And it basically just left just this one heading tag and wrapped it in the content block tag.
Okay, I'm just copying this over now.
You said you're doing this to make it look simple?
Yeah. So what's going to happen is as we go, this is really more just setup of the framework pieces. So when we go and develop things later, this is how it's going to work. When we make our forms for people to put in a new to-do list item, we're going to make the form in its own HTML file. And then we're just going to extend the base.html. So that way in that new form file, we don't have to write all of this stuff again. We don't have to write the head element again, just to write that it's on my site. And we don't have to. And so if we have 10 or 15 other files in our templates that we're using, which you'll end up using a lot of different templates, then we don't have to write this stuff like 15, 20 times. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So that's what this template system is really doing. And again, that's what web frameworks are going to do generally, is they're going to have some way of breaking out the content from an HTML page and dynamically putting things into it so that you can have different pages with the least amount of code that you're going to write for it. All right, so right at time, we're going to save this. I'm going to reload server, and it should have, since this was just a refactoring, unless we completely mess something up, it should still work exactly how it did. So nothing broke. That's a good sign. But we can also confirm by just adding something in here, like say this is still the index. I'm gonna save that and reload it. That way there's some kind of change to inform us that we did in fact set this up in the proper way, and we can edit things on this index page and they'll reflect here. And there we go. So this is still the index. So now we have our template set up in our template directory, and we've broken them out into our base HTML, which is the standard way to do it in Django, and use the Django template language to put the other pieces in index. And we will then next week be able to do some more front end development and do a little bit more work on these things to make it look prettier than this, because now we just have the basic pieces set up. Yes.
Can I see the base tab again? Like the what you have in that block?
Yeah, the base.html. Sure.
Yeah, I just need to get this.
Yeah.
That's how far back I was, sorry.
No, hey, no, do not apologize. It's totally fine. Any questions about how these things work, or what we plugged in today and what we set up?
I'm sure I have some this week.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, don't hesitate to reach out as you're working on these things in Discord. Gloria, don't give up on this. Reach out to me. Let's set up some time. We can talk about it, and we can sit down and go through things.
Yeah, I would love to. The problem is I work 9 hours a day, so I don't know when I would be able to do it. I can't even use a computer at work or a phone.
Oh man, okay.
So yeah, I'll just try to rewatch the video.
Okay. I'm really flexible though. So I mean, if you got the energy and you find some time in your day, hit me up. We'll figure something out. All right. I'll make sure that you're not totally discouraged and you don't want to just walk away from it. I mean, even if it's very little bits that you do, if you're only able to do it maybe 15, 20 minutes every other day, you're still going to make progress. It's just like exercising. It's just like running. It's uncomfortable at first. It's difficult, but I know you can do it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. All right. If anybody else has questions, can hang out. We can answer questions now on the spot. If not, we are just a couple minutes over time. We did get to the things I wanted to, because the point. So you're welcome to drop, and I'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, bye.